Good evening, and welcome once again. Tonight we won't be sailing across distant seas or scaling mist-shrouded mountains, but stepping into the quiet intensity of a different kind of battlefield. One shaped not by empires, but by honour, not by conquest alone, but by silence, discipline, and the weight of a single blade. We're going in search of the samurai. Not the Hollywood warrior in gleaming armour, nor the stoic action hero of modern myth, but the real men and women who walked the rain-slicked roads of feudal Japan, bound by duty, torn by loyalty, and forged in the crucible of centuries of war, peace, and transformation. From the misty provinces of the 10th century to the smoke-choked ruins of Shiroyama in 1877 and beyond, into the boardrooms, dojos, and cinema screens of our own time, the samurai have never truly vanished. They've evolved. They've been rewritten, romanticized, weaponized, and revered. But at their core lies a question that still echoes through Japanese history. What does it mean to serve and to live with honor in a world that no longer needs warriors? We'll follow their journey from provincial horsemen to shogunal regents, from rebels to bureaucrats, from sword-wielding elites to symbols of a national soul. We'll witness their triumphs in battle, their quiet despair in peacetime, and their final, tragic charge against the tide of modernity. And we'll ask why, even now, their code, real or imagined, continues to shape ideas of courage, loyalty, and self-mastery across the globe. As always, I'd love to know where you're listening from, and whether the night is still or stormy where you are, whether you're curled beneath a blanket, pausing between chapters of your own life, or simply seeking a moment of stillness in a noisy world. I'm glad you're here with me. If this journey into the heart of warrior culture speaks to you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories, where history, legend, and the human spirit meet. Now then, let us draw the sword from its scabbard. The path of the samurai awaits. The founding of Heian in 794 initiated a profound transformation in Japan's political landscape, one that unintentionally laid the groundwork for the emergence of the warrior class. Emperor Kanmu's choice to move the imperial capital from Nara to what would later be known as Kyoto was far more than a tactical political shift. It entrenched a model of centralized court rule that would increasingly struggle to assert authority over Japan's expansive and frequently defiant provinces. The Heian court, deeply immersed in Chinese-influenced cultural sophistication and elaborate Buddhist rituals, progressively distanced itself from the pragmatic responsibilities of provincial governance and military defense. This retreat from direct oversight left a void in rural Japan, which ambitious local families swiftly moved to occupy. In response, the imperial court began appointing influential local figures as estate stewards and tax collectors, bestowing upon them considerable autonomy in return for preserving order and guaranteeing a steady flow of revenue to the capital. Though originally conceived as temporary administrative posts, these roles gradually became hereditary, consolidating both economic control and military strength within the hands of provincial warrior lineages. Meanwhile, the aristocratic elite of the capital, ever more disinclined to abandon their refined urban lifestyles, transformed into absentee landowners who depended entirely on these regional administrators to manage their distant estates. Over the course of the 9th and 10th centuries, these estate managers evolved into a distinct warrior class. Unlike the earlier conscripted armies of the Nara period, widely regarded as inefficient and financially burdensome, these provincial forces comprised professional fighters who supplied their own arms, armour, and horses. Their allegiance was directed not toward the distant and abstract notion of imperial sovereignty, but rather to their immediate commanders, thereby establishing the intricate network of personal loyalties that would become central to samurai culture. The northern frontier served as the crucible in which this nascent warrior ethos was tempered. The intermittent campaigns against the Emishi people of northern Honshu, spanning from the late 8th to the early 11th centuries, functioned simultaneously as a training ground and a proving ground for provincial warriors. The Emishi accomplished horsemen and archers who had resisted imperial encroachment for generations employed guerrilla tactics that rendered conventional Chinese-inspired military doctrines ineffective. Engaging them demanded individual initiative, exceptional horsemanship, and precision with the bow skills that would become defining characteristics of samurai martial tradition. These frontier conflicts were savage and unceremonious, bearing little resemblance to the stylized warfare celebrated in courtly literature. Warriors contended with adversaries intimately familiar with the rugged terrain, who launched surprise attacks from dense woodlands and mountain passes. Survival hinged on personal prowess rather than rigid unit discipline, and victory often yielded concrete rewards such as land grants and official appointments from the court. The psychological imprint of this frontier warfare was immense. It fostered a warrior mindset that prized practical competence over scholarly knowledge and personal honor above bureaucratic rank. The most successful commanders of this era began attracting followers from across eastern Japan, offering protection, prospects for advancement, and a share in the spoils of battle in exchange for unwavering loyalty and military service. This reciprocal bond stood in stark contrast to the impersonal bureaucratic machinery of the Heian court, giving rise to tightly knit military bands bound by oaths and shared peril. Among these emerging warrior lineages, the Minamoto and Taira clans rose to prominence, both claiming descent from imperial princes who had been granted surnames and dispatched to the provinces to forge their own fortunes. The Minamoto, also referred to as the Zenji, traced their ancestry to Emperor Seiwa and established their stronghold in the Kanto region of eastern Japan. The Taira, or Heishi, asserted lineage from Emperor Kamu and initially consolidated power in western provinces before expanding eastward. These claims of imperial blood were vital to their legitimacy. In a society where status was dictated by lineage, such ancestry provided a veneer of rightful authority that might otherwise have been deemed insubordinate. Though these genealogical ties were often tenuous and occasionally fabricated, they served as potent political instruments whose perceived validity mattered more than historical accuracy. The Minamoto cultivated their influence through strategic alliances with local landholders and Buddhist monasteries across the Kanto plain. They constructed a network of fortified compounds that functioned as both administrative hubs and military bastions. Typically situated on elevated terrain with sweeping views of the surrounding countryside, these installations featured wooden palisades, watchtowers, and storage facilities for arms and supplies. The main residence, built in the Shindan-zukuri architectural style but modified for defense, housed the clan leader's family and served as a gathering place for retainers. In contrast, the Taira pursued a maritime-oriented strategy, maintaining closer connections to the imperial court and leveraging control over sea trade. Their base at Itsukushima, crowned by the iconic floating torii gate, symbolized their dual authority in both military and religious spheres. The Taira fleet dominated the inland sea, the most critical commercial waterway in Japan, amassing considerable wealth that financed their military ambitions and expanded their political reach. This naval focus granted them superior mobility and logistical advantages that land-based rivals initially found difficult to counter. The weaponry and armour that distinguished these warrior bands from court-appointed soldiers evolved through battlefield experience rather than theoretical design. The primary weapon was the asymmetrical longbow, crafted from laminated bamboo and wood to achieve a balance of flexibility and power. Often exceeding 2 meters in length, these bows could accurately launch arrows beyond 200 meters. Arrowheads were meticulously engineered for specific purposes: bodkin points for piercing armor, broadheads for unarmored foes, and incendiary arrows for siege operations. Mounted archery emerged as the hallmark combat technique of the burgeoning samurai class. Warriors trained from an early age to shoot accurately while guiding their mounts solely with their knees and reins, a skill demanding years of disciplined practice. The ideal samurai horse stood 13 to 14 hands high, bred not for size but for stamina and responsiveness, perfectly adapted to Japan's mountainous landscape and capable of navigating narrow trails while bearing a fully equipped rider. Armor of this era reflected both functional requirements and aesthetic sensibilities. Early samurai armor, known as oyoroi, consisted of small iron or leather scales laced together with silk cords and coated in lacquer for weather resistance. The distinctive box-shaped cuirass offered robust protection against arrows while preserving the mobility essential for mounted combat. Helmets, or kabuto, featured neck guards and facial masks designed to deflect blows without obstructing vision. Weighing approximately 25 kilograms, the full ensemble was engineered for prolonged wear during extended campaigns. Sword technology also underwent significant refinement during this period. The curved, single-edged blade that would later epitomize the samurai was still evolving from earlier straight-bladed forms influenced by Chinese prototypes. Master swordsmiths pioneered differential hardening methods, producing blades with hardened cutting edges and resilient spines, capable of retaining sharpness through prolonged combat while resisting fracture. Though not yet the artistic masterpieces of later centuries, these early swords represented major strides in metallurgical expertise and craftsmanship. Tactical doctrine shaped by frontier warfare emphasized individual valor within a framework of coordinated maneuver. Warriors advanced in loose formations, seeking opportunities for single combat while remaining cognizant of their comrades' positions. Engagements typically commenced with long-range arrow exchanges, followed by mounted charges with spears or swords if the enemy closed in. This approach demanded rigorous training and deep mutual trust among unit members, reinforcing the close-knit bonds that defined samurai military units. Training for young warriors encompassed not only weapons mastery but also horsemanship, swimming, and various forms of physical conditioning. Equally vital was mental preparation, which drew upon Buddhist and Shinto meditation practices to cultivate clarity and emotional composure under duress. Initially pragmatic responses to the rigors of combat, these disciplines gradually coalesced into sophisticated philosophical frameworks that would shape samurai ethos for generations. Economically, the warrior class derived its foundation from control over agricultural land and the peasants who tilled it. Unlike European feudalism, where land tenure was typically conferred by a superior lord, Japanese warriors often acquired holdings through conquest, strategic marriages, or the cultivation of previously uncultivated territory. This fostered a more entrepreneurial attitude toward wealth accumulation and a direct linkage between military service and economic gain. The relationship between provincial warriors and the imperial court remained complex and often paradoxical throughout this formative era. Warriors required court recognition to legitimize their local authority, while the court depended on military force to uphold its nominal control over the provinces. This interdependence created avenues for ambitious commanders to gain influence at court while preserving their regional power bases. Religious institutions played a pivotal role in shaping samurai culture. Buddhist monasteries provided education, medical care, and occasionally military instruction to young warriors, while Shinto shrines offered spiritual protection and served as neutral venues for negotiations between rival clans. The syncretic religious practices that arose from this interaction would profoundly influence samurai values and conduct. The gradual militarization of Japanese society during the late Heian period gave rise to new social identities and relationships that challenged established court hierarchies. Provincial warriors began to perceive themselves as a distinct class with its own code of honor and traditions, separate from both the cultured aristocracy and the agrarian peasantry. This emerging self-conception would solidify during the upheavals of the late 12th century, paving the way for Japan's first military government. By the mid-12th century, the warrior families that had risen during the Heian era found themselves increasingly entangled in the political intrigues of the imperial court. Despite their cultural sophistication and administrative acumen, the court nobility had become militarily powerless and relied entirely on armed provincial clans to settle disputes that their intricate bureaucratic mechanisms could not resolve. This dependence would prove disastrous for the traditional order, granting ambitious military leaders direct access to the highest echelons of government and intimate familiarity with court politics. The first clear signal that warriors had become indispensable to court affairs came with the Shogun Rebellion of 1156. The death of Emperor Toba ignited a succession crisis between his son, the retired Emperor Sutoku, and his younger son, Emperor Go-Shirakawa. Both factions enlisted the military support of the Minamoto and Taira clans, marking the first time samurai armies clashed within the capital itself. The conflict laid bare the utter military helplessness of the court nobility, who watched from their palace walls as armoured horsemen determined their political destiny through street battles in Kyoto. Taira no Kiyomori aligned himself with Emperor Go-Shirakawa, while a faction of the Minamoto backed the rival claimant. The decisive confrontation unfolded at Shirakawa Palace, where Minamoto no Tamatomo's legendary archery prowess became the stuff of chronicles. Accounts describe arrows capable of piercing multiple layers of armour and allegedly sinking small boats with a single shot. Nevertheless, superior coordination and tactics secured victory for Kiyomori's forces, who encircled the palace and set it ablaze, compelling their adversaries into open combat where numerical advantage proved decisive. The aftermath of the Shogun Rebellion established perilous precedents that would reshape Japanese governance. For the first time, members of the imperial family were executed for political offences, shattering the long-standing taboo against harming those of imperial blood. More significantly, the victorious warriors received lavish rewards in the form of court titles and land grants, demonstrating that military service could yield rapid advancement unattainable through traditional bureaucratic channels for generations. 3 years later, the Meiji Rebellion of 1159 further accelerated the militarization of court politics. Minamoto no Yoshitomo, seeking to restore his clan's standing after their Shogun defeat, allied with the ambitious courtier Fujiwara no Nobuyori in a plot to eliminate Taira influence. Their conspiracy began with the abduction of Emperor Nijo and the retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa during Kiyomori's pilgrimage to Kumano. The rebels initially achieved total surprise, seizing the imperial palace and key government buildings across Kyoto. However, their failure to immediately neutralize Kiyomori proved fatal. Upon learning of the coup while en route, he swiftly returned to the capital with a substantial force and methodically reclaimed strategic positions. The climactic battle occurred in the Rokuhara district, where the Taira maintained their primary compound. Despite fierce resistance, Yoshitomo's forces were overwhelmed by superior numbers and Kiyomori's tactical brilliance. The Minamoto's defeat in the Meiji Rebellion appeared to cement Taira dominance. Kiyomori executed most adult male members of the rival clan, sparing only Yoshitomo's younger sons due to their youth, a decision influenced by Buddhist principles of compassion and the intercession of Kiyomori's stepmother. This act of mercy would later prove catastrophic. The 3 surviving boys, Yoritomo, Noriyori, and Yoshitsune, were exiled to different regions, where they spent the next 2 decades cultivating the alliances that would ultimately dismantle Taira power. Kiyomori's triumph in 1160 marked the dawn of unprecedented military influence over imperial governance. Unlike earlier warrior leaders who returned to their provincial bases after fulfilling military duties, Kiyomori took up permanent residence in Kyoto and systematically infiltrated the court hierarchy. He arranged marriages between his daughters and imperial princes, secured high court ranks for his sons and relatives, and gradually replaced traditional officials with Taira loyalists. Kiyomori's governance represented a radical departure from precedent. Rather than preserving the traditional divide between courtly and military spheres, he forged a hybrid system that merged warrior efficiency with courtly legitimacy. Taira administrators trained in both martial and bureaucratic arts could enforce imperial decrees through force, while preserving the ceremonial protocols that lent legal authority to state actions. This fusion of military and civil power generated immense wealth for the Taira clan. Control over key court offices granted access to nationwide tax revenues, while their maritime expertise enabled them to dominate trade with Song China. Operating from bases throughout the inland sea, the Taira fleet collected customs duties, transported goods, and offered protection services that yielded profits far surpassing traditional agricultural income. Contemporary sources suggest that Taira wealth during this era exceeded that of many provincial governors and rivaled the resources of major Buddhist monasteries. Yet Kiyomori's very success sowed the seeds of the Taira's eventual downfall. The clan's rapid accumulation of court positions and economic privileges bred resentment among both the traditional aristocracy and rival warrior families. The Taira began adopting the refined customs of the court nobility, losing the martial edge that had propelled them to power, while simultaneously alienating potential military allies through exclusionary policies. The situation worsened when Kiyomori attempted to manipulate the imperial succession to place his infant grandson on the throne. This unprecedented assertion of military control over the imperial institution violated core tenets of Japanese governance and furnished his enemies with potent propaganda. Even former supporters began to question whether the Taira had forsaken their warrior identity in pursuit of courtly luxury and political dominance. By 1180, opposition to Taira rule had coalesced around Prince Mochihito, son of the retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa. The prince's call to arms against Kiyomori's regime provided the legal justification provincial warriors needed to legitimize rebellion. More importantly, it offered the exiled Minamoto survivors a chance to reclaim their ancestral status and avenge past defeats. Minamoto no Yoritomo, who had spent 2 decades in exile on the Izu Peninsula under the guardianship of the Hojo family, received Prince Mochihito's summons in the 8th month of 1180. His response revealed the strategic foresight that would define his leadership. Rather than launching a reckless assault against superior Taira forces, Yoritomo began methodically assembling a coalition of eastern warriors who shared grievances against Kiyomori's rule. The Zenpei War commenced with Yoritomo's uprising at Yamauchi in Sagami Province. His initial force numbered fewer than 300 mounted warriors, drawn primarily from his Hojo relatives and their immediate retainers. This modest beginning reflected the calculated approach that would distinguish Yoritomo's strategy throughout the conflict. Unlike earlier rebellions that relied on dramatic gestures and swift victories, he pursued a deliberate campaign aimed at gradually expanding his power base while avoiding premature clashes with stronger enemy contingents. The first major engagement occurred at the Battle of Ishibashiyama, where Yoritomo's small army encountered a far larger Taira force led by Obakage Chika. The battle showcased both the tactical sophistication of late Heian warfare and the critical role of intelligence networks in shaping outcomes. Fighting in mountainous terrain during a torrential downpour, both sides grappled with poor visibility and communication breakdowns that splintered their formations into scattered skirmishes. Despite fierce resistance, the Minamoto forces were overwhelmed by superior numbers and forced to retreat into the dense forests of the Hakone Mountains. Yoritomo himself narrowly evaded capture, hiding in a hollow tree as Taira search parties passed mere meters away. This near catastrophe taught him invaluable lessons about the limitations of conventional warfare and the necessity of secure rear bases capable of providing refuge during setbacks. Rather than hastily rebuilding his shattered army, Yoritomo crossed to Awa province on the Bozo Peninsula, where he embarked on the patient work of coalition building that would ultimately secure his victory. His approach diverged fundamentally from traditional warrior leadership models. Instead of demanding immediate service based on personal loyalty or feudal obligation, he offered prospective allies tangible benefits, land grants, court appointments, and protection from Taira reprisals. The Kanto region proved especially receptive to Yoritomo's message for several interconnected reasons rooted in broader Heian-era tensions. Many local warrior families had been excluded from the spoils of Taira rule, despite their contributions in earlier conflicts. The concentration of court offices and economic privileges within Kiyomori's immediate circle had created a growing cohort of ambitious yet frustrated provincial leaders who saw rebellion as their only path to advancement. Moreover, the Taira government's increasing emphasis on Chinese trade and court ceremony had estranged traditional warrior values centered on martial excellence and personal honor. Many Eastern warriors viewed Kiyomori's embrace of courtly customs as a betrayal of samurai principles and feared that continued Taira hegemony would extinguish opportunities for military distinction altogether. Yoritomo's success in attracting followers also stemmed from his keen grasp of the economic and social transformations reshaping Japanese society. The expansion of agricultural surplus and commercial activity had generated new forms of wealth operating outside traditional court hierarchies. Local strongmen who controlled these resources sought legal recognition and protection from arbitrary taxation or confiscation. By offering to formalize their status within a military government framework, Yoritomo addressed practical concerns that the existing court system could not resolve. Yoritomo's movement transformed from a desperate revolt into a formidable military threat with astonishing speed during the autumn of 1180. Within 2 months of his defeat at Ishibashiyama, he had established a fortified headquarters at Kamakura and assembled an army of over 20,000 mounted warriors. This rapid expansion reflected both his personal magnetism and the depth of anti-Taira sentiment across the eastern provinces. The selection of Kamakura as Yoritomo's capital demonstrated the strategic acumen that would define his governance. Surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and facing Sagami Bay to the south, the location offered formidable natural defences difficult for enemies to breach. Symbolically, the site held historical significance as the stronghold of an earlier Minamoto ancestor, Minamoto no Yorinobu, linking Yoritomo's rebellion to his clan's legacy of leadership in the Kanto region. The establishment of the Kamakura headquarters marked a fundamental shift in the conflict's nature. Rather than merely seeking to replace Taira officials with Minamoto appointees within the existing court structure, Yoritomo began constructing parallel governmental institutions that operated independently of Kyoto's authority. He appointed his own provincial governors, established courts to adjudicate disputes among his followers, and created administrative systems to manage territories under his control. This institutional innovation drew the attention of warrior families nationwide who had grown disillusioned with the constraints of court-based advancement. The Minamoto offered merit-based promotion, direct access to leadership, and the opportunity to help shape new governing structures. These incentives proved especially appealing to younger sons of established families who face limited prospect under traditional inheritance customs. Meanwhile, Kiyomori's response to the burgeoning rebellion exposed the strategic vulnerabilities that would ultimately doom Taira rule. Initially dismissing the uprising as a minor provincial disturbance resolvable through routine policing, he failed to mobilize his full resources promptly. This miscalculation granted Yoritomo crucial time to consolidate his position and attract additional supporters. When Kiyomori finally recognized the threat's severity, his military response was hampered by the very success that had elevated the Taira. 2 decades of court life had softened many Taira warriors and distanced them from the harsh realities of provincial warfare. Their equipment, tactics, and leadership had grown oriented towards ceremonial functions rather than battlefield efficacy. More fundamentally, the Taira faced a strategic dilemma that would plague them throughout the war. Their power base remained concentrated in western Japan along the inland sea, while the rebellion had seized control of the economically vital Kanto Plain. Any attempt to suppress the uprising required prolonged campaigns in unfamiliar territory, against enemies who enjoyed local support and intimate knowledge of the landscape. The first major Taira offensive against Yoritomo's stronghold commenced in early 1181 under the command of Taira no Koromori. The expedition showcased both the Taira's lingering military capacity and the defensive advantages held by determined local forces. Koromori's army, estimated at over 70,000 men, ranked among the largest assembled in Japan during the Heian period. However, the campaign quickly encountered logistical challenges that would typify much of the Genpei War. Supplying such a massive force during winter proved exceedingly difficult, especially in hostile territory where the local populace supported the enemy. Minamoto guerrilla raids on supply convoys and the systematic destruction of food stores compelled Koromori to fragment his army into smaller, more vulnerable detachments. The decisive engagement occurred at the Battle of Sekigahara, where Minamoto forces under Yoritomo's brother, Yoshitsune, achieved complete tactical surprise. Before dawn, Yoshitsune's cavalry charged through a flock of waterfowl roosting near the Taira encampment. The sudden eruption of thousands of birds taking flight triggered panic among Taira troops, who mistook the commotion for a massive enemy assault. In the ensuing chaos, much of Koromori's army fled without mounting serious resistance. The Battle of Sekigahara marked the beginning of Minamoto's strategic ascendancy that would define the remainder of the war. Yoritomo's forces had proven not only capable of defending their territorial base, but also of defeating major Taira offensives through superior tactics and local knowledge. More importantly, the victory cemented the Minamoto reputation for military effectiveness, drawing new supporters and undermining the morale of potential adversaries. The creation of Yoritomo's military government in Kamakura signified far more than a mere transfer of leadership. It heralded the dawn of a revolutionary shift in Japanese political organization that would persist for nearly 7 centuries. Yet the sudden death of Japan's first shogun in 1199 triggered an immediate succession crisis that endangered the fragile warrior regime before it could solidify its authority. Yoritomo's eldest son, Minamoto no Yorie, inherited the shogunal title at the age of 17, but lacked both his father's political insight and the intricate web of personal alliances that had unified the Eastern Warrior Coalition. Seizing the moment, the Hojo clan, Yoritomo's most trusted advisors and the family of his wife, Masako acted swiftly to preserve the Kamakura system, while simultaneously securing their own dominance within it. Masako's father, Hojo no Tokimasa, assumed the newly instituted role of Shikan, regent, effectively assuming control over all governmental operations while preserving the outward appearance of Minamoto rule. This arrangement exemplified the nuanced legitimacy dynamics of medieval Japanese politics, where real power often operated beneath layers of ceremonial authority and delegated roles. The Hojo Regency faced immediate resistance from rival warrior families who felt shortchanged after their contributions to the Genpei War. The Wada clan, commanding significant military strength in the Kanto region, openly questioned whether the Hojo possessed the martial credentials necessary to lead a warrior government. These simmering tensions exploded into open conflict during the Kenin Rebellion of 1203, when Yori attempted to assert direct control over military appointments and land grants. The uprising laid bare the inherent instability of early Kamakura governance. Yori's supporters included many of the most celebrated battlefield commanders from the Genpei warmen, whose status derived from martial prowess rather than administrative expertise. Yet their individual combat excellence could not offset the Hojo's superior grasp of institutional mechanics or their meticulous cultivation of loyalty among mid-level bureaucrats. The decisive confrontation unfolded not on the battlefield, but through a series of calculated political maneuvers that systematically isolated Yori from his base of power. Tokimasa methodically reassigned key military commands to Hojo loyalists, while circulating rumors about the young shogun's mental instability and unfitness to rule. When Yori finally attempted to rally forces against the regency, he discovered that most of his nominal allies had already defected or adopted a stance of cautious neutrality. His assassination in 1204 eliminated the last serious threat to Hojo supremacy within the Kamakura government. His younger brother, Sanetomo, proved far more pliable under regent control, devoting his energies to poetry and courtly rituals rather than military affairs. This arrangement perfectly served Hojo interests, allowing them to wield real power while retaining the symbolic legitimacy conferred by the Minamoto bloodline. The consolidation of Hojo authority coincided with the development of sophisticated administrative structures that would define Kamakura governance for over a century. Unlike the Heian court's reliance on Chinese bureaucratic templates, the warrior government established pragmatic institutions tailored to the specific needs of the military class. The most significant of these was the Mandokoro Administrative Board, which efficiently managed financial matters, land disputes, and personnel appointments. The promulgation of the Jōi Shikimoku in 1232 marked the culmination of this institutional evolution. This legal code, comprising 51 articles, established standardized procedures for resolving disputes among warriors while respecting regional customs and local practices. In stark contrast to earlier Japanese legal frameworks that imposed uniform, Chinese-inspired regulations nationwide, the Jōi Shikimoku acknowledged the diversity of local conditions and offered flexible mechanisms for addressing them. Its provisions on land tenure reflected the practical realities of warrior society rather than abstract legal theory. It affirmed that military service generated legitimate claims to land-based rewards, yet also recognized that excessive fragmentation of estates could undermine the economic viability of the warrior class. Inheritance rules sought to balance individual rights with collective security by permitting property division while ensuring minimum holdings sufficient to sustain mounted warriors. Criminal law under the Jōi Shikimoku prioritized restitution and practical deterrence over idealized notions of justice. Penalties were designed to compensate victims and prevent future offences while preserving the military utility of the warrior class. Capital punishment was reserved for the gravest crimes, a reflection of both Buddhist ethical influences and the pragmatic understanding that executing trained warriors diminished the state's defensive capabilities. The administrative competence of the Hojo system became especially evident in its management of the complex land tenure arrangements that had proliferated during the late Heian period. The unchecked growth of private estates, tax exemptions and overlapping jurisdictions had created a legal quagmire that the imperial court proved incapable of untangling. Kamakura officials, armed with detailed land surveys and standardized protocols, systematically clarified property rights and resolved many of the contradictions that had stymied earlier reform efforts. This administrative effectiveness drew support from warrior families across Japan who had grown disillusioned with the arbitrary and inefficient procedures of the Kyoto court. The Kamakura government offered predictable legal processes, merit-based advancement, and protection from the capricious demands of court nobles, practical advantages that outweighed the ceremonial honours and cultural prestige still offered by the imperial capital. However, the very success of Hojo governance sowed the seeds of future instability. The concentration of administrative power within a single family bred resentment among other warrior clans excluded from meaningful participation. The Hojo response, creating additional bureaucratic layers and expanding official posts, failed to resolve the core issue of equitable power distribution. Moreover, the economic prosperity of the early Kamakura era masked structural vulnerabilities that would surface during crises. The government's finances relied heavily on agricultural taxes and fees from land transactions, revenue streams sufficient in peacetime, but inflexible in the face of extraordinary expenditures like large-scale warfare. The first major test came with the Mongol invasions of the late 13th century. The Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan after the Mongol conquest of Song China, had unified the Chinese mainland and Korean peninsula under a single imperial authority for the first time in centuries. This consolidation unlocked unprecedented military and economic resources, enabling the Mongols to contemplate overseas expansion on a scale never before attempted by a Chinese regime. Kublai Khan's initial diplomatic overtures to Japan in 1268 followed standard Mongol protocol for incorporating new territories. A letter delivered via Korean intermediaries demanded Japanese acknowledgement of Mongol suzerainty and tribute payments in exchange for protection and trade privileges. Though couched in diplomatic language, the message carried unmistakable threats. The Hojo regent's decision to ignore these envoys reflected a profound misjudgment of Mongol capabilities and intentions. Isolated by geography and lacking recent experience with continental warfare, Japanese leaders underestimated the scale of military force the Yuan dynasty could project. Their confidence rested on memories of successful resistance to earlier Chinese and Korean incursions in the 7th century, conflicts that bore little resemblance to the coordinated large-scale assault Kublai Khan was preparing. The first Mongol invasion fleet departed Korean ports in November 1274, comprising roughly 900 vessels carrying 23,000 Mongol and Korean troops, along with horses, siege equipment, and supplies for a prolonged campaign. This armada represented the largest amphibious operation attempted in East Asian waters to that date, requiring months of preparation and resources drawn from across the Mongol Empire. The invasion force first targeted Tsushima and Iki Islands as stepping stones toward Kyushu. The defenders, fewer than 200 warriors combined, fought valiantly, but were swiftly overwhelmed by superior numbers and unfamiliar weaponry. The Mongols deployed Chinese-manufactured crossbows, explosive bombs, and tightly coordinated infantry tactics that proved devastating against traditional Japanese mounted archery. The main landing occurred at Hakata Bay on Kyushu's northwestern coast, where local warriors from the Shimazu, Otomo and Kikuchi clans had assembled approximately 10,000 mounted samurai, supported by a Shigeru foot soldiers and local militias. Their tactics, honed over centuries of small-scale clan warfare, emphasized individual duels and ritualized combat, but proved catastrophically inadequate against the Mongols' disciplined formations and coordinated assaults. The Battle of Hakata Bay exposed critical flaws in traditional samurai warfare, prompting sweeping tactical reforms in the decades that followed. Japanese warriors approached combat as a sequence of individual challenges, formal declarations, arrow exchanges, then close-quarters swordplay. This method, effective in conflicts between similarly equipped warrior bands, was suicidal against enemies who ignored etiquette and fought as cohesive units. Mongol doctrine prioritized massed firepower volleys of arrows designed to create killing zones, followed by synchronized charges aimed at breaking enemy formations rather than engaging in personal combat. Their composite bows, manufactured to uniform standards, outranged and outpenetrated Japanese weapons. Most critically, Mongol archers fired in coordinated salvos to maximize psychological impact, not to seek individual targets. Equally disruptive were the explosive bomb ceramic containers filled with gunpowder and shrapnel, designed to panic horses and shatter cavalry cohesion. Contemporary Japanese accounts describe these weapons as supernatural, their thunderous blasts seeming to defy natural law. Despite these disadvantages, Japanese defenders inflicted heavy casualties through sheer bravery and intimate knowledge of the terrain, employing hit-and-run raids and night attacks to harass Mongol supply lines. The Mongol withdrawal after just 2 days resulted from a combination of fierce resistance and logistical strain. Seasonal storms in the Korea Strait made extended naval operations perilous, especially for heavily laden transports near unfamiliar shores. While later chronicles attributed the retreat to a divine typhoon, kamikaze, contemporary records suggest storm damage was secondary to the failure to secure beachheads and establish sustainable supply lines, an underestimation of amphibious warfare's complexities by commanders accustomed to continental campaigns. The aftermath triggered a crisis of confidence within the Kamakura government. Though the Hojo successfully organized Kyushu's defense, the cost of mobilizing nationwide forces strained finances to the breaking point. Worse, the traditional reward system granting land for military service collapsed, as defenders had protected existing territory rather than conquered new lands. This failure to compensate warriors violated core expectations of the warrior class, breeding widespread resentment among families who had incurred debts to equip themselves for battle. Many had sold property or borrowed heavily, expecting to recoup losses through land grants. Without such rewards, they faced financial ruin, the Hojo response issuing honorary titles and creating new bureaucratic posts failed to address the underlying economic crisis. Meanwhile, Japan's increasing monetization created new expenses, like imported weapons, that the land-based reward system could not meet. Kublai Khan's decision to launch a second invasion in 1281 reflected both determination and confidence that lessons from the first campaign would ensure success. The Yuan dynasty spent 6 years preparing, building specialized amphibious vessels and assembling forces from across its empire. The second invasion dwarfed the first. 2 fleets were to converge on Kyushu, the Eastern Route Army, 40,000 troops in 900 ships from Korea, and the Southern Route Army, 100,000 former Song soldiers in 3,500 ships from southern China. This unprecedented logistical undertaking demonstrated the Yuan's administrative might. In response, Japan had spent the intervening years constructing coastal defences, including a stone wall stretching kilometres along Hakata Bay, a shift from mobile defence to static fortification. Warriors also adapted tactics, abandoning individual combat for coordinated unit actions that leveraged terrain to offset Mongol advantages. The successful defense against this second invasion exhausted Kamakura's financial reserves and exposed fatal flaws in its reward system. By the early 14th century, the Hojo Regency faced mounting pressure from warriors denied compensation or economic relief amid worsening conditions. The monetizing economy generated debts the land-based system couldn't resolve. Emperor Go-Daigo's accession in 1318 coincided with this crisis of warrior confidence. Unlike predecessors who accepted ceremonial roles, Go-Daigo harbored genuine political ambitions and understood the Hojo's vulnerabilities. His court attracted disaffected warriors, ambitious nobles, and Buddhist monks united against the status quo. His Kenmu restoration began with careful coalition building, recognizing that imperial legitimacy alone couldn't defeat Kamakura's professional warriors. He recruited excluded warrior families and younger sons with limited prospects under the Hojo system. The Genko War erupted in 1331 when Kamakura uncovered his conspiracy. Go-Daigo fled to Mount Kasagi, fortified by warrior monks from Enryakuji Temple, initiating a conflict that would reshape Japan's political order. The mountain stronghold, protected by steep slopes and dense forests, enabled guerrilla tactics that defined the war. The Hojo response revealed their military decline. Once loyal warrior families, now independent and unrewarded, hesitated to commit forces. Many adopted neutrality, awaiting a clear victor. The siege of Mount Kasagi showcased traditional Japanese siege warfare's limits. Attackers had numbers, but lacked specialized equipment to reduce fortifications. Storming the mountain yielded heavy losses and little gain, while defenders used terrain to inflict disproportionate casualties. Go-Daigo's 1332 capture via betrayal, not assault, seemed to end the rebellion, but his exile to Oki Islands created a potent symbol of resistance. His absence allowed ambitious commanders to claim they acted in his name while pursuing personal goals. Kusunoki Masashige emerged as the most innovative imperial general, operating from mountainous strongholds south of Kyoto. His fortress at Chihaya, built on steep terrain with concealed positions and killing zones, became a model for Japanese defensive engineering. The 1333 siege of Chihaya exposed Kamakura's tactical obsolescence. Conventional mounted charges and individual combat failed against coordinated archery, ambushes, and psychological warfare. Masashige's use of deception and night raids fostered belief in divine support for the imperial cause. The decisive turning point came with Ashikaga Takauji's defection. A Minamoto cadet branch leader who had loyally served the Hojo, Takauji switched sides, judging the Kamakura system incapable of effective governance or rewarding service. His betrayal triggered a cascade of defections, as regional strongmen long waiting for a clear signal declared for the imperial cause, bringing troops and territory. Kamakura's rapid collapse revealed its authority rested on tradition, not loyalty or competence. The 1333 fall of Kamakura, marked by the systematic burning of government buildings, temples and elite residences, symbolized the old order's total eradication. Smoke from the fires was visible 30 kilometers away. Go-Daigo's return to Kyoto and establishment of direct imperial rule initially seemed to fulfill the anti-Kamakura coalition's aims, but his vision-centralized governance, modeled on Chinese bureaucracy, clashed with 14th century Japan's decentralized reality. His attempts to restore court administration and diminish warrior influence alienated the very military leaders who had secured his victory. The Kenmu Restoration's failure became evident within months. Go-Daigo's government lacked the financial resources and administrative machinery to govern effectively. Worse, his focus on court ceremony and Chinese-style bureaucracy ignored the warrior class's practical needs, the dominant force in Japanese society. Ashikaga Takauji's 1335 rebellion reflected both personal ambition and genuine disagreement over governance. He argued that effective rule required warrior participation and recognition of their interests in land and military command. His program, though self-serving, addressed real concerns about the sustainability of court-centered rule after a century of warrior dominance. The conflict between Takauji and imperial forces under Nita Yoshisada led to the Nanboku-cho period, northern and southern courts. When Go-Daigo fled Kyoto with the imperial regalia, establishing a rival court in Yoshino's mountains, Takauji installed a competing emperor in Kyoto. This dual court system created unprecedented legitimacy crises, dividing warrior families nationwide. Unlike past dynastic disputes, this conflict embodied opposing governance philosophies. The southern court championed imperial primacy and decentralized resistance. The northern court, backed by Ashikaga military power, emphasized administrative efficiency in the plains and urban centers. Military campaigns during this era were protracted and indecisive, marked by sieges, guerrilla warfare, and shifting alliances. Central Japan's mountainous terrain favored defense, preventing either side from achieving total victory. Ashikaga Takauji's establishment of the shogunate in 1338 sought a new synthesis. Unlike Kamakura's pretense of serving the emperor while ruling independently, the Ashikaga shogunate actively sought explicit imperial sanction for its authority, a recognition that legitimacy in warrior-dominated Japan required both military power and ceremonial endorsement. This strategy reflected not only Takauji's political acumen, but also his clear recognition that lasting authority required at least a veneer of ceremonial legitimacy. The Ashikaga governmental framework, centered in Kyoto rather than a separate military capital, marked a radical departure from Kamakura-era precedents. By situating their headquarters in the imperial capital, the Ashikaga shoguns positioned themselves not as rivals to the court nobility, but as collaborative partners. While this arrangement fostered cultural exchange and opportunities for political cooperation, it also entangled the warrior government in the same factional intrigues and ceremonial obligations that had long paralyzed purely court-based administrations. The evolution of the Shugo-daimyo system under Ashikaga rule emerged from both pragmatic necessity and deliberate policy decisions, choices that would leave an indelible mark on Japan's political trajectory. Originally appointed as temporary provincial governors with narrowly defined powers, the Shugo gradually transformed into formidable regional lords, exercising near-total control over their domains. This shift occurred partly through intentional Ashikaga policy granting expanded authority to loyal supporters, and partly due to the exigencies of governing during an era of persistent warfare. The Shugo-daimyo differed fundamentally from earlier provincial officials in both the breadth of their authority and their relationship to the central government. Unlike Kamakura-era governors, who primarily functioned as military commanders and tax collectors, the Shugo-daimyo wielded judicial, administrative, and economic power, effectively ruling their territories as autonomous sovereigns. They maintained private armies, levied taxes, administered justice, and even conducted diplomatic relations with neighbouring domains. This decentralization of power produced a fragmented political landscape in which dozens of regional strongmen held de facto sovereignty, owing only nominal allegiance to the Ashikaga shogun, while prioritizing their own interests whenever they clashed with central directives. The shogun's influence thus depended entirely on his ability to sustain a fragile coalition of these powerful lords through a delicate balance of rewards, threats, and diplomatic finesse, an effort demanding constant vigilance and substantial resources. Economically, the Shugo-daimyo system was anchored in comprehensive control over agricultural output and local commerce within their domains. Unlike the Kamakura model, which relied on income from specific land grants, the Shugo-daimyo extracted revenue from all economic activity in their territories. This broader fiscal base granted them greater financial strength than their predecessors, but also necessitated more sophisticated administrative machinery to manage effectively. The rise of castle towns during this period reflected both the military imperatives and economic opportunities afforded by territorial consolidation. These fortified settlements, typically built around the lord's primary residence, served simultaneously as administrative centres, military garrisons and commercial hubs, drawing in merchants, artisans and service providers. The concentration of economic life in these planned communities generated new forms of wealth and social organisation that would profoundly shape the course of Japanese urban development. The Onin War, erupting in 1467, represented the explosive culmination of tensions that had simmered within the Ashikaga system for over a century. Though it began as a succession dispute within the shogunal family, the conflict rapidly expanded to encompass deeper questions about the balance of power between central authority and regional lords. The involvement of virtually every major warrior family transformed what might have remained a limited dynastic squabble into a full-scale civil war. The immediate spark was Ashikaga Yoshimasa's failure to produce a male heir, leading him to name his brother Yoshimi as successor. The subsequent birth of his son Yoshihisa created rival claims that powerful Shugo factions exploited for their own strategic advantage. The Hosokawa clan, led by Hosokawa Katsumoto, backed Yoshimi, while their rivals, the Yamana under Yamana Sozen, supported the infant Yoshihisa. The Onin War's military campaigns were distinguished by their catastrophic impact on Kyoto and its environs. Unlike earlier conflicts characterized by mobile warfare across wide regions, much of the fighting occurred within the capital itself, where rival armies erected fortifications and engaged in brutal street-to-street combat. Contemporary chronicles describe entire districts reduced to ash, with major temples and aristocratic mansions utterly destroyed. Tactical innovations during the Onin War reflected both the urban battlefield and the changing composition of Japanese armies. The Shugo daimyo increasingly relied on ashigaru foot soldiers rather than traditional mounted samurai A shift, driven by both economic efficiency and the demands of siege warfare. These professional infantrymen, armed with spears, crossbows and eventually firearms, proved far more effective than cavalry in the confined spaces and fortified positions typical of urban combat. The introduction of firearms to Japan in 1543 by Portuguese traders on Tanegashima Island triggered a technological revolution that would redefine warfare in the final decades of the Ashikaga period. Early demonstrations revealed both the promise and limitations of these weapons. While arquebuses offered superior armor penetration and required less training than bows, they were slow to reload, unreliable in rain, and produced smoke that betrayed the shooter's position. Yet Japanese craftsmen, renowned for their metallurgical expertise, quickly mastered domestic production. Within a decade, Japan was manufacturing firearms at a scale surpassing European output, a testament to both technical skill and the urgent demands of the Sengoku era's relentless warfare. The adoption of firearms entailed far more than weapon substitution. It demanded new forms of military organization emphasizing unit coordination over individual heroism. Infantry formations armed with guns required protection from cavalry and integration with other arms to maximize effectiveness, leading to more complex command hierarchies and specialized battlefield roles. Castle architecture underwent a parallel transformation in response to gunpowder weapons and evolving siege tactics. Traditional wooden palisades and earthen ramparts proved inadequate against sustained bombardment. Japanese military engineers responded with sophisticated stone fortifications capable of withstanding both artillery and conventional assault, laying the foundation for the iconic castles of the late Sengoku period. The emergence of the Sengoku period around 1477 marked the beginning of an age of unprecedented military innovation and political fragmentation that would persist until national reunification in the late 16th century. The collapse of effective Ashikaga authority created a vacuum that ambitious regional leaders swiftly exploited. By 1477, Japan had fractured into dozens of independent domains, ruled by Sengoku daimyo, who owed no meaningful allegiance to the weakened shogunate in Kyoto. These warlords hailed from diverse backgrounds, former Shugo families, successful military commanders, and even wealthy merchants who had purchased warrior status, but shared key traits: ruthless pragmatism, innovative military thinking, and a sophisticated grasp of economic warfare. They revolutionized Japanese military organization by professionalizing their forces. Unlike earlier seasonal armies composed of part-time warriors who returned to farming during planting and harvest, the Sengoku daimyo maintained standing armies equipped and trained for continuous operations. The core of these forces consisted of professional Ashigaru infantry, recruited from the peasantry, provided with standardized gear, regular pay, and intensive training in coordinated tactics. This military revolution necessitated equally advanced logistical systems, networks of supply depots, state-sponsored arms manufactories, and efficient transport routes capable of sustaining prolonged campaigns. Castle towns became centres of military production, where skilled artisans crafted weapons to uniform specifications and trained recruits in both individual combat and unit coordination. Economically, these innovations were underpinned by systematic exploitation of territorial resources. The Sengoku daimyo implemented comprehensive land surveys to accurately assess agricultural productivity, enabling them to maximize tax revenue without crippling peasant output. They promoted technological improvements, new rice strains, advanced irrigation, and efficient farming tools that boosted yields and supported larger populations. From this crucible of competition emerged Oda Nobunaga as the most innovative and successful of the Sengoku daimyo. Initially dismissed as an eccentric minor lord ruling only part of Owari province, Nobunaga defied convention by wearing foreign-style clothing, associating with merchants and foreigners, and flouting ceremonial norms traits that led many contemporaries to underestimate his strategic brilliance. His first major triumph at the Battle of Okayama in 1560 showcased the unconventional tactics that would define his career. Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of eastern Japan's most powerful daimyo, marched toward Kyoto with an army of 25,000, confident in his numerical superiority. His forces camped in a narrow valley during a heavy rainstorm, assuming the weather would deter attack. Nobunaga, with fewer than 3,000 men, defied samurai convention by launching a surprise assault through unguarded mountain paths, striking directly at Imagawa's headquarters. Coordinated with a lightning strike that added chaos, the attack killed Yoshimoto and shattered Imagawa power, establishing Nobunaga's reputation for tactical genius and willingness to employ dishonorable methods for decisive victory. His subsequent campaigns against militant Buddhist institutions, particularly the fortified temple complexes of Mount Hiei, Ishiyama Honganji, and Nagashima, were among his most controversial yet strategically essential actions. These religious centres had evolved into independent military powers with vast territories and armies rivaling secular lords. The decade-long siege of Ishiyama Honganji, 1570-1580, demonstrated both the military might of Buddhist institutions and Nobunaga's resolve to eliminate all rival power centres. The fortress temple overlooking Osaka Bay featured sophisticated defences blending Japanese architecture with European-style artillery positions. Its defenders, monks, and thousands of armed peasant followers, iko-iki, employed firearms, cannons, and disciplined infantry tactics. Nobunaga countered with a strategy of military pressure, economic blockade, and psychological warfare. He surrounded the complex with fortified outposts, cut supply lines, secured exclusive access to Portuguese firearms and gunpowder, and deployed naval forces to dominate Osaka Bay, showcasing his mastery of combined arms. The 1571 destruction of Enraku-ji on Mount Hii shocked Japan with its brutality. 30,000 troops systematically burned every building and killed nearly all inhabitants, including non-combatants. This unprecedented act served multiple purposes: eliminating a military threat, demonstrating the cost of resistance, and cementing Nobunaga's fearsome reputation. Nobunaga's military innovations extended beyond firearms to a complete reorganization of battlefield doctrine. His armies employed coordinated formations of arquebusiers protected by spearmen and supported by cavalry assigned specific tactical roles, not individual duels. This required rigorous training and discipline, transforming warfare into a science of unit coordination directed by professional officers. The 1584 Battle of Nagikute fought after Nobunaga's death revealed how thoroughly his methods had reshaped Japanese warfare. Forces loyal to Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu executed complex maneuvers involving synchronized infantry, artillery support, and timed cavalry charges, tactics impossible for traditional warrior bands. Victory now depended on coordination and flexibility, not individual prowess. Nobunaga's reliance on professional Ashigaru armies also marked a fundamental shift in the social basis of military power. These full-time soldiers, freed from agricultural duties and paid regular wages, proved more reliable than part-time warriors. Supporting them required unprecedented logistical sophistication. Supply depots linked by improved roads, standardized field rations, portable cooking gear, and medical provisions to sustain effectiveness during long campaigns. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's rise from a Shigeru foot soldier to supreme commander exemplified the social mobility of the Sengoku era and underscored the growing importance of administrative talent. Initially handling logistics under Nobunaga, Hideyoshi's organizational genius earned him increasing military authority. After Nobunaga's 1582 death, his swift consolidation of power and elimination of rivals demonstrated mastery of both military and political strategy. The 1583 Battle of Shizugatake cemented Hideyoshi's dominance. Facing Shibata Katsuya Nobunaga's most experienced general, Hideyoshi executed a legendary forced march of over 50 kilometers in a single day to achieve tactical surprise, concentrating superior forces against isolated enemy positions before reinforcements could arrive. The battle showcased fully evolved Sengoku tactics, predetermined battle plans, coordinated multi-unit attacks, and the systematic collapse of enemy lines through overwhelming pressure at key points. Hideyoshi's unification campaign required adapting Nobunaga's methods to new challenges. While Nobunaga had focused on destroying independent power centers in central Japan, Hideyoshi faced the complex task of integrating diverse regional domains into a unified state, necessitating not just conquest, but diplomacy, economic incentives, and administrative reforms. The 1590 siege of Odawara against the Hojo clan demonstrated his mastery of large-scale operations. Commanding over 200,000 troops from across Japan, he confronted a fortress representing the pinnacle of Sengoku castle design, featuring concentric walls, advanced artillery positions, and underground tunnels for counterattacks. Hideyoshi countered with innovative siege engineering, artificial hills for elevated firing positions, covered approaches, and tunnels to undermine foundations. Naval blockades and psychological warfare further demoralized defenders, culminating in Japan's reunification after nearly 2 centuries of fragmentation. His redistribution of Hojo lands established precedents for Tokugawa land policies and proved that no regional power could resist a unified Japan. The subsequent invasions of Korea, 1592 and 1597, aimed to redirect the warrior class's energies outward and secure Japanese dominance in East Asian trade. The initial 160,000-strong invasion force, the largest in Japanese history, achieved rapid success, capturing Seoul in 3 weeks through superior tactics and coordinated arquebus spear formations. However, extended supply lines across the Korea Strait exposed critical logistical weaknesses. Korean Admiral Yi Sun-sin's ironclad turtle ships, armed with multiple cannons, devastated Japanese naval forces inexperienced in artillery-based sea combat. The intervention of Ming Chinese armies, equipped with superior artillery and organized along continental lines, forced Japanese commanders to abandon aggressive assaults for defensive tactics and coordinated volleys. The 1593 siege of Pyongyang highlighted these challenges. Chinese forces under Li Rusong employed siege guns and disciplined infantry to dislodge Japanese defenders from positions once deemed impregnable, initiating a strategic stalemate that defined the remainder of the campaigns. The Korean invasions profoundly influenced Japanese military development, exposing naval limitations and stimulating shipbuilding innovations. Exposure to Chinese and Korean tactics provided valuable continental military knowledge. Financially, sustaining armies overseas for 6 years strained even the wealthiest domains, contributing to domestic economic instability. Balancing overseas commitments with homeland defense forced new approaches to resource allocation and strategic planning. Hideyoshi's death in 1598 and Japan's withdrawal from Korea created a new power vacuum. The regency system established for his infant son proved incapable of maintaining unity among daimyo who returned from Korea with enhanced military capabilities and diminished respect for central authority. Competing coalitions soon formed around Tokugawa Ieyasu and Ishida Mitsunari, reflecting not only personal ambition but fundamental disagreements over Japan's future governance. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 marked the definitive climax of the power struggles that had intensified following Hideyoshi's death, cementing Tokugawa dominance over Japan for the next 2.5 centuries. Involving more than 160,000 warriors divided between the eastern and western armies, the engagement vividly illustrated how thoroughly the military innovations of the Sengoku period had reshaped Japanese warfare. Both sides deployed integrated formations of firearms, artillery and cavalry, executing meticulously planned maneuvers that demanded extensive preparation, professional command structures and disciplined coordination. Tokugawa Ieyasu's decisive victory at Sekigahara led directly to the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, in a development that initiated the most profound transformation in samurai history. Unlike the Kamakura and Ashikaga regimes, which had preserved the warrior class's core military function while adapting to shifting political realities, the Tokugawa government deliberately restructured samurai society to serve the imperatives of centralized control and enduring peace. This transformation began immediately after 1600, when Ieyasu was formally appointed shogun and launched a series of policies designed to convert Japan's warrior elite from autonomous military commanders into salaried bureaucrats serving a highly centralized state. The Sankin Kotai system, formally codified in 1635 under the third shogun, Tokugawa Iemitsu, became the cornerstone of this new order. It mandated that all daimyo maintain permanent residences in Edo and spend alternate years in attendance at the shogun's court, while their wives and heirs remained in the capital as de facto hostages. This policy served multiple strategic objectives far beyond simple surveillance. The constant movement of daimyo processions, often comprising hundreds of retainers, servants and guards, between domains and Edo stimulated a massive internal economy centered on transportation, lodging, and luxury goods. This redirected warrior expenditures away from military preparedness and towards ceremonial display and conspicuous consumption. The practical execution of Sankin Kotai required daimyo to organize elaborate, highly regulated processions whose size and composition reflected the assessed value of their domains. Shogunal law strictly governed routes, rest stops, and ceremonial protocols, transforming Japan's major highways, such as the Tokaido and Nakasendo, into choreographed corridors of political submission. Each procession became a public performance, affirming the daimyo's wealth and, more importantly, his acceptance of subordinate status within the Tokugawa hierarchy. The financial burden of this system proved crippling. Many domains devoted 30 to 50 of their annual revenues to Sankin Kotai obligations, forcing drastic reductions in samurai retainer bands and the conversion of military stipends into administrative salaries for a much smaller cadre of officials. This economic pressure accelerated the metamorphosis of samurai from independent warriors into stipendiary dependents whose livelihoods hinged entirely on their lord's favour and the stability of the domain bureaucracy. Unlike the Sengoku era, when ambitious warriors could rise through battlefield merit or by switching allegiance, the Tokugawa system offered no legitimate path to advancement through martial prowess. Instead, samurai success now required mastery of bureaucratic procedures, legal knowledge, and fluency in the intricate ceremonial codes governing social interactions. This social reordering was ideologically legitimized by the Shino-Kosho, four-class system, derived from Chinese Confucian theory. It placed samurai at the apex as the moral and administrative elite, followed by farmers, the productive backbone, artisans, makers of useful goods, and merchants, deemed parasitic for profiting without producing. While this hierarchy theoretically elevated samurai status, it masked their practical loss of autonomy and military relevance. Confucian ideals emphasized moral cultivation and governance, yet the rigid hereditary structure prevented social mobility. Incompetent samurai retained privilege, while talented commoners remained locked out of advancement. The prohibition on non-samurai carrying weapons enforced through periodic sword hunts and strict registration preserved the symbolic distinction of the warrior class even as martial skills atrophied. Samurai retained the exclusive right to wear the daisho, katana and wakizashi, visible emblems of their status and theoretical readiness for combat. In reality, most possessed only rudimentary swordsmanship and no combat experience. Their weapons had become ceremonial accessories. Further codification of samurai conduct came through kakun, house codes, issued by virtually every domain in the early Edo period. These detailed regulations governed everything from dress and deportment to marriage and finances, serving both as tools of control and as philosophical justifications for samurai privilege. Complementing these were the Bukushohato, laws for the military houses, first promulgated by the Tokugawa government in 1615 and periodically revised. These national statutes banned private warfare, restricted castle construction, required shogunal approval for interdomain marriages, and regulated interactions with the imperial court, effectively transforming samurai from autonomous warlords into civil servants under comprehensive state oversight. Intellectually, this transformation was rationalized through the development of bushido philosophy. Unlike the pragmatic warrior ethos of the Sengoku period, focused on battlefield effectiveness and loyalty to successful commanders, Tokugawa-era bushido emphasized abstract virtues, moral self-cultivation, aesthetic refinement, an unwavering loyalty to one's hereditary lord, regardless of circumstance. Drawing from Neo-Confucian ethics, Zen Buddhist discipline, and romanticized readings of past warrior traditions, this ideology provided samurai with a sense of purpose divorced from warfare. The ideal samurai, as portrayed in Cocoon and popular literature, demonstrated worth through diligent administration, cultural pursuits like poetry and tea ceremony, and absolute fidelity channeling warrior energy into activities that reinforced rather than threatened the established order. Martial arts themselves evolved from combat training into formalized disciplines. Ryuha focused on character development and spiritual insight. Schools of swordsmanship, archery, and other skills proliferated, embedding physical practice within elaborate philosophical frameworks that link technique to moral and spiritual growth-maintaining warrior identity without practical military utility. As the Tokugawa period progressed, however, samurai faced mounting economic distress. The shift from land-based fiefs to fixed rice stipends created systemic instability. While stipends remained frozen at early 17th century levels, the cost of living rose steadily due to urbanization, population growth, and commercial expansion. When domains converted rice payments to cash in the mid-Edo period, samurai became vulnerable to volatile rice markets manipulated by savvy merchant financiers. Trained in administration and culture, not commerce, many samurai fell into debt, forced to borrow against future stipends from creditors who understood market dynamics far better than their socially superior clients. Legal and social taboos barred samurai from engaging in trade, preventing entrepreneurial adaptation, though some secretly invested in commercial ventures or advised merchants. Such activities violated the Confucian principles underpinning their status, risking not just legal penalties, but social identity itself. Meanwhile, urban merchant communities in Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto amassed wealth and cultural influence that directly challenged the official hierarchy. These centers operated on market logic, rewarding efficiency and innovation over birthright, and produced vibrant cultural forms like kabuki theatre, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, and popular fiction that celebrated commercial success, romantic love, and individual achievement, values antithetical to Confucian orthodoxy. The resulting cognitive dissonance impoverished samurai, beholden to wealthy merchants occupying the lowest social rung-eroded faith in the existing order. Some began questioning whether a system that impoverished its moral guardians while enriching parasitic traders reflected true justice. Limited exposure to Western knowledge through rangaku, Dutch learning, offered alternative intellectual frameworks, particularly in medicine, astronomy, and military science. Yet government restrictions and social stigma curtailed its spread. Periodic shogunal reforms, such as the Kyoho reforms under Tokugawa Yoshimune, sought to alleviate samurai debt and boost agricultural productivity, but failed to address the structural contradiction. A warrior class transformed into bureaucrats in an increasingly commercial economy. Urban consumer culture added further pressure. Restaurants, theatres, and pleasure quarters demanded cash expenditures that strained fixed stipends, forcing samurai to compete with merchants in consumption patterns they could ill afford. Education reinforced this dilemma. Domain schools trained samurai children in Confucian classics, calligraphy, and arithmetic, producing competent administrators, but ill-equipped individuals for economic survival. Later, as administrative roles grew more specialized, some domains even recruited talented commoners, provoking resentment among hereditary samurai whose birthright privileges were now contested by merit. By the Genroku era, 1688-1704, Edo had blossomed into the world's largest city, with over 1 million inhabitants. Originally a military headquarters, it had evolved into a cosmopolitan metropolis where samurai bureaucrats, wealthy merchants, artisans and entertainers coexisted in a dynamic, often contradictory social ecosystem. The city's infrastructure, elaborate water systems, waste management and fire brigades testified to the Tokugawa state's administrative sophistication. Culturally, Genroku witnessed a flowering that bridged samurai refinement and merchant vitality. The licensed pleasure quarters of Yoshiwara became incubators of artistic innovation, where kabuki, music and literature explored themes of desire, duty and social tension. Ukiyo-e prints by artists like Hishikawa Morinobu democratized visual art, depicting urban life with unprecedented realism and accessibility. Ihara Saikaku's novels celebrated merchant wit and adaptability, while Chikamatsu Monzaemon's bunraku plays presented moral dilemmas without clear resolutions, mirroring the ethical ambiguities of contemporary life. It was within this complex cultural landscape that the Akko incident of 1703 erupted a real-life drama embodying the era's central contradictions. The crisis began when Asano Naganori, daimyo of Akko, was tasked with assisting imperial envoys at Edo Castle a role, requiring mastery of intricate ceremonial protocols. During preparations, tensions with Kira Yoshinaka, the shogun's master of ceremonies, culminated in Asano drawing his sword and wounding Kira in the Pine Corridor, Matsuno Oroka, a grave violation of castle law. The shogunate responded swiftly. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku the same day, his domain confiscated and his retainers cast adrift as ronin. Notably, Kira faced no punishment, despite evidence of provocation, creating a widespread sense of injustice. As masterless samurai, Asano's former retainers lost not only income but social identity. Traditional warrior ethics demanded vengeance to restore their lord's honor, yet doing so meant defying the law and certain death. This dilemma crystallized the tension between personal loyalty and state authority. Oishi Yoshio, Asano's chief retainer, emerged as leader of the vengeful faction. For nearly 2 years, he orchestrated a meticulous plan while publicly feigning dissipation, frequenting brothels, drinking excessively, and behaving disgracefully to lull Tokugawa spies into complacency. This performance, sustained at great personal and psychological cost, exemplified the ethical complexity of his mission, sacrificing his honor temporarily to fulfill a higher loyalty. On December 14, 1702, 47 ronin launched a coordinated assault on Kira's Edo residence. Dividing into 2 groups, they overcame guards through disciplined tactics, honed in an era of peace, killed Kira, and presented his head at Asano's grave, fulfilling their duty. The aftermath plunged the shogunate into crisis. Public opinion hailed the ronin as paragons of loyalty, yet their actions defied state law. After weeks of deliberation, the government ordered them to commit seppuku, a compromise that acknowledged their moral righteousness while upholding legal authority. Their graves at Sengakuji became pilgrimage sites, and their story, immortalized in Chushingura, endured as a powerful symbol of the unresolved tensions between individual honor and state control that defined the Tokugawa era. The ronin had undeniably broken the law and by strict legal standards merited punishment. Yet their actions embodied the very ideals of loyalty, honor and self-sacrifice that the Tokugawa regime itself extolled as the core virtues of the samurai class. Public sentiment expressed through kabuki plays, bunraku performances, popular novels, and everyday discourse overwhelmingly celebrated the 47 ronin as heroic exemplars of proper warrior conduct. This widespread admiration placed the shogunate in a profound dilemma: how to punish behavior that most of society viewed not only as morally justified, but as the highest expression of samurai ethics. The government's prolonged deliberations before issuing a final verdict reflected the complexity of the moral and legal questions at stake. Senior officials, Confucian scholars, and legal advisors engaged in intense discussions about the relationship between law and morality, the enduring obligations of retainers to their deceased lords, and the delicate balance between upholding social order and honouring traditional warrior values. Their ultimate decision to permit the ronin to commit seppuku rather than execute them as common criminals was a carefully calibrated compromise. It acknowledged the sincerity and moral motivation behind their actions, while affirming the principle that even noble intentions could not excuse violations of state law. The cultural reverberations of the Akko incident extended far beyond its immediate political resolution, embedding itself deeply into Japanese popular consciousness for centuries. Through kabuki, bunraku, literature, and eventually film, the story evolved into a foundational national narrative exploring timeless themes: loyalty versus legality, personal sacrifice, and the anguish of moral conflict. The 47 Ronin became archetypal cultural heroes whose choices offered a moral compass for individuals navigating competing duties in any era. This incident unfolded against the backdrop of a vibrant intellectual flourishing during the Genroku period, which mirrored both the administrative demands of peacetime governance and the philosophical unease stirred by the samurai's transformation from warriors to bureaucrats. Neo-Confucian academies, established in domains across Japan, granted samurai access to Chinese philosophical texts once reserved for court nobles and Buddhist monks. These institutions served dual purposes, training competent administrators while fostering scholarly communities engaged in sophisticated debates on ethics, governance, and social order. The Shoheiko Academy, founded by the Tokugawa shogunate in Edo, emerged as the preeminent center for Neo-Confucian learning. Its curriculum, rooted in the writings of Jushi and other Song dynasty thinkers, emphasized moral self-cultivation through classical study and the practical application of ethical principles to governance. Students mastered not only doctrine, but also rigorous methods of textual analysis and philosophical reasoning skills essential for bureaucratic careers or scholarly pursuits. Diverse schools of Neo-Confucian thought soon emerged, reflecting both intellectual depth and practical concerns. The Keimon school, founded by Yamazaki Ansai, championed strict orthodoxy and conservative social order. In contrast, the Kogaku school associated with Yamaga Soko and Ito Jinsai advocated a return to Confucius's original teachings, rejecting later interpretations they deemed corrupted by Buddhist or Taoist influences. Simultaneously, Rangaku, Dutch learning, introduced samurai intellectuals to European scientific knowledge that challenged centuries-old assumptions. Dutch medical texts, filtered through Nagasaki's limited trade window, revealed anatomical truths contradicting traditional Chinese medicine. European works on astronomy, mathematics, and geography forced scholars to reconsider Japan's place in a global context. Progressive domains began translating technical manuals, sending retainers to study with Dutch interpreters, and applying Western techniques to agriculture, manufacturing, and military preparedness, despite official restrictions on foreign contact. Martial arts, too, transformed during this era. Once practical combat systems, they evolved into ruha, schools, emphasizing spiritual discipline and philosophical insight. Miyamoto Musashi's Niten Ichi-ryu epitomized this shift. His Book of Five Rings framed swordsmanship as a path to universal strategic wisdom, applicable to administration and personal development alike. Economically, many samurai quietly circumvented prohibitions on commerce, investing through intermediaries or leveraging administrative posts for unofficial income necessities, born of stagnant stipends and rising urban costs. Culturally, the Genroku period saw unprecedented cross-class interaction. Haiku poetry, perfected by Matsuo Basho, fused classical aesthetics with contemporary sensibility. Professional sumo and commercial theatre districts allowed samurai to share cultural spaces with merchants and artisans, though hierarchical distinctions were preserved through seating and conduct. Yet this cultural brilliance masked deep structural vulnerabilities. Japan's urban prosperity rested on an agricultural base highly susceptible to natural disaster. When the Tenmei famine, 1782-1788, struck, triggered by the 1783 eruption of Mount Asama, followed by years of cold summers and crop failure, millions faced starvation. Some regions lost 20-30% of their population. Domain officials, guided by Confucian ideals of benevolent rule, opened granaries and organized relief, but many lacked the funds to sustain both disaster response and samurai stipends, eroding faith in the social order. The even more devastating Tenpo famine, 1833-1837, exposed the failure of intervening reforms. Food riots erupted in Edo itself, a shock to administrators who believed the capital immune to rural-style unrest. In 1837, former Osaka magistrate Oshio Heihachiro, a respected Confucian scholar, led an armed uprising against corrupt officials and grain-hoarding merchants. Though crushed in a day, his rebellion was ideologically seismic. A samurai of high standing had concluded that violent resistance was morally necessary. His proclamations, written in accessible language, articulated widespread grievances and offered a radical alternative to passive suffering. Peasant uprisings grew increasingly sophisticated. Organizations like the Ikki Leagues, led by literate village elites, coordinated actions across domains. The 1866 Boshu Ikki mobilized over 200,000 people, demonstrating organizational capacity rivaling that of domain governments. Samurai administrators found themselves torn: uphold state authority or acknowledge legitimate popular suffering. When government policies violated Confucian principles of benevolent rule, loyalty to superiors clashed with ethical duty. Reform efforts reflected this tension. The Kyoho reforms, 1716-1745, under Tokugawa Yoshimune, pragmatically promoted new crops and regulated commerce. The Kansei reforms, 1780-1793, led by Matsudaira Sadanobu, took a conservative turn reasserting Neo-Confucian orthodoxy, strengthening samurai education and attempting to restore blurred social boundaries. The Tenpo reforms, 1841-1843, spearheaded by Mizuno Tadakuni, proved most ambitious and disastrous. Attempts to forcibly relocate urbanites to farms and suppress commerce ignored economic realities, disrupting vital supply chains and provoking widespread resistance. Intellectually, Kokugaku, national learning, offered a radical alternative to Chinese-derived thought. Scholars like Motori Norinaga and Hirata Atsutane championed Japan's indigenous traditions, drawing authority from ancient texts like the Kojiki and Manyoshu. This emphasis on Japanese uniqueness and imperial reverence laid ideological groundwork for the Sono Joi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, movement, a potent fusion of cultural pride and anti-foreign sentiment that united disaffected samurai across domains. By the 1840s, external pressures intensified. News of Britain's victory in the Opium War, 1839-1842, revealed Western military dominance over Asian powers. Samurai intellectuals debated Japan's response: adopt Western technology to preserve independence, or resist all foreign influence as a threat to cultural integrity. domains began modernizing militarily establishing Western-style units, building coastal batteries straining already fragile finances. The cost of defense, sankin-kotai, and disaster relief forced impossible choices between tradition and survival. Informal study groups and cross-domain networks emerged as incubators for new political ideas, bypassing ossified official channels. By the early 1850s, a sense of systemic crisis permeated all levels of society. Natural disasters, economic strain, popular unrest and foreign threats converged, exposing the Tokugawa system's inability to adapt. Then, on July 8, 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry's Black Ships appeared in Edo Bay steam-powered warships, belching smoke visible from the shogun's castle. Armed with modern cannons and capable of maneuvering regardless of wind, these vessels shattered 2 centuries of complacency born of isolation. Perry's squadron, comprising the steam frigates Susquehanna and Mississippi and the sailing ships Plymouth and Saratoga, represented a technological gulf Japan's coastal defences could not bridge. The Tokugawa government's response revealed its paralysis. Senior officials trained in domestic ritual but inexperienced in international diplomacy spent weeks debating whether to receive Perry's envoys. Coastal batteries stood unmanned. Japan's few warships remained hidden in inner harbours, powerless to challenge the intruders. The illusion of security had evaporated overnight, and with it, the foundations of the Tokugawa order began to crumble. Perry's strategic approach revealed a keen understanding of Japanese political psychology and the deep fractures within the Tokugawa system. Rather than press for immediate negotiations, he delivered President Fillmore's letter requesting trade relations and announced his intention to return the following year for a response. This tactic granted Japanese officials time to deliberate while simultaneously signalling that refusal would incur serious consequences. His calculated restraint paired with dramatic displays of American naval power, including thunderous cannon salutes audible across Edo, maximized psychological pressure without triggering outright hostilities. The year between Perry's first and second visits laid bare the profound divisions within samurai society over how to respond to foreign encroachment. Recognizing its military impotence, the shogunate broke with centuries of precedent by soliciting opinions from daimyo nationwide, a move intended to build consensus for accommodation, but which instead exposed irreconcilable rifts. Responses reflected the intellectual ferment of the late Edo period. Progressive lords like Shimazu Akira of Satsuma and Nabeshima Naomasa of Saga argued that Japan must abandon isolation and adopt Western technology to preserve sovereignty. Conservative daimyo, especially those aligned with the Kyoto court, insisted that opening the country would corrupt Japanese culture and destabilize the political order that had ensured peace for over 2 centuries. The Treaty of Kanagawa, signed on March 31, 1854, was a reluctant compromise that satisfied neither foreign ambitions nor domestic critics, but reflected the shogunate's constrained options. It opened 2 ports Shimoda and Akudate for American provisioning, and established consular relations, stopping short of full commercial treaties. Yet its true significance lay in establishing a dangerous precedent, that foreign powers could compel Japan to abandon its traditional policies through the mere threat of force. This forced opening ignited a domestic political crisis that worsened as other Western nations demanded similar concessions. The Harris Treaty of 1858, negotiated by U.S. Envoy Townsend Harris went further, granting extraterritorial rights to foreigners and capping Japanese customs duties, thereby eroding national sovereignty. Crucially, these terms were finalized without imperial approval, giving anti-Tokugawa factions potent ammunition to accuse the shogunate of betraying Japan's interests and failing to defend its independence. The Sonojoi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, movement crystallized as a coherent political force, uniting anti-foreign sentiment with broader disillusionment toward Tokugawa rule. Its slogan offered a clear alternative: restore imperial authority and resist Western influence. Rooted in Kokugaku scholarship and traditional notions of imperial legitimacy, this ideology resonated deeply with samurai who saw the shogunate as morally and practically bankrupt. In response, Senior Councillor Inosuke launched the Ansi Purge, 1858-1860, arresting or executing over 100 samurai, including prominent intellectuals and imperial loyalists from domains like Mito and Satsuma. But repression backfired. The victims became martyrs, galvanizing resistance and further undermining the shogunate's moral authority. The assassination of Inosuke outside Edo Castle's Sakura Damon Gate on March 24, 1860, marked a turning point. Carried out by 18 ronin from Mito and Satsuma, the attack demonstrated the willingness of Sonojoi activists to use terrorism against collaborators. The successful breach of the shogun's inner security perimeter and the public nature of the killing sent shockwaves through the warrior class, exposing the regime's vulnerability. His death created a leadership vacuum and eroded confidence in Tokugawa authority, empowering ambitious domains to assert autonomy while positioning themselves as defenders of the emperor. Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa, and others, geographically distant from Edo and historically independent, began modernizing militarily and pursuing independent foreign policies, laying the groundwork for coordinated opposition. Satsuma exemplified pragmatic adaptation. Under Shimazu Hisamitsu and his key lieutenants, Saigo Takamori and Okubo Toshimichi, the domain established Western-style military units, acquired modern arms through foreign trade, and developed local industries to reduce reliance on Edo. The 1862 Namamugi incident, where Satsuma retainers killed British merchant Charles Richardson for failing to show proper deference to Hisamitsu's procession, showcased both Satsuma's defiance and the shogunate's inability to control its vassals. When Satsuma refused British demands for punishment and indemnity, the Royal Navy bombarded Kagoshima in 1863. Though the city suffered heavy damage, the inconclusive outcome convinced Satsuma leaders that Western powers could be resisted not through tradition, but through disciplined modernization. Choshu adopted a more radical stance. Influenced by reformers like Kido Takayoshi and Takasugi Shinseku, it positioned itself as the vanguard of anti-foreign resistance while pioneering military innovation. Its creation of mixed unit militias, integrating samurai, ashigaru, and peasants shattered class barriers and produced more effective forces. In May 1863, Choshu began bombarding foreign ships in the Shimonoseki Strait, disrupting international shipping. But this provoked a devastating multinational retaliation in September 1864. A combined British, French, American, and Dutch fleet obliterated Choshu's coastal batteries and occupied key positions, proving the futility of isolated defiance. This defeat triggered a civil war within Choshu, 1864-1865, between conservative samurai families seeking Tokugawa reconciliation and Takasugi's progressive Kiheitai militia, which advocated total social and military transformation. The progressives' victory established a new model: merit-based mixed-class units equipped with Western weapons and tactics blueprints for the future imperial army. The pivotal breakthrough came in March 1866 with the Satsuma-Choshu alliance, brokered by the visionary Sakamoto Ryoma. Despite historical enmity and differing reform philosophies, the two domains forged a military and political coalition capable of toppling the shogunate. Their agreement on mutual defense and coordinated action created the nucleus of the anti-Tokugawa movement. This alliance was tested during the Second Choshu Expedition, 1866, when the shogunate mobilized over 100,000 troops from loyal domains. Despite overwhelming numbers, the Tokugawa forces lacked coordination and modern arms. Choshu's smaller but better equipped and tactically superior army inflicted decisive defeats, forcing a humiliating withdrawal and cementing the rebels' military credibility. The death of Shogun Tokugawa Iemochi during the campaign and the succession of Tokugawa Yoshinobu opened a window for compromise. Recognizing the untenability of the old order, Yoshinobu initiated negotiations to create a reformed government blending imperial restoration with practical administration. But events had outpaced diplomacy. Political momentum and military realities rendered half measures obsolete. On January 3, 1868, the Meiji Restoration was proclaimed, a revolution cloaked as restoration. The young Emperor Meiji's charter oath promised deliberative assemblies, global engagement and social mobility while preserving imperial authority and cultural identity. It reflected the coalition's diverse interests and the pragmatic demands of modern governance. The new government systematically dismantled Tokugawa institutions. The 1871 abolition of the Heian system replaced feudal domains with centrally governed prefectures, stripping daimyo of political power, though they were compensated with government bonds and titles, ensuring minimal resistance. The commutation of samurai stipends, 1873-1876, replaced hereditary rice payments with interest-bearing bonds. Many samurai, unfamiliar with finance, sold these at steep discounts to savvy merchants, accelerating the transfer of wealth from warriors to commercial elites. The 1876 Hitorei Edict banned sword-wearing by all except military and police personnel, stripping samurai of their most potent status symbol and marking the formal end of their privileged identity. Finally, the 1873 conscription ordinance created a modern national army based on European models, requiring 3 years of service from all male citizens regardless of class. This new force, trained in Western tactics and equipped with advanced technology, was both larger and more effective than any samurai army. Resistance culminated in the 1877 Satsuma Rebellion, the last stand of the old order. Saigo Takamori, disillusioned by the Meiji government's abandonment of samurai values, led approximately 40,000 traditional warriors in a final, desperate challenge. The siege of Kumamoto Castle that February showcased the lingering martial prowess of the samurai, but also the overwhelming logistical, technological and organizational superiority of the imperial army. Saigo's army composed mainly of former Satsuma samurai armed with traditional swords and matchlocks, and organized according to classical military doctrines, initially achieved notable tactical victories against government forces. However, the defenders of Kumamoto Castle, bolstered by modern artillery and sustained by secure supply lines, held their ground while imperial reinforcements gathered for a decisive counter-offensive. The rebellion's final act came at the Battle of Shiroyama on September 24, 1877. By then, Saigo's forces had dwindled to fewer than 500 men, encircled by over 30,000 government troops equipped with rifles, artillery, and Gatling guns. Their last charge, futile yet defiant, epitomized the samurai ideals of honor, loyalty, and acceptance of fate in the face of inevitable defeat. Whether Saigo died by enemy fire or by his own hand in ritual suicide, his death marked a symbolic end to the samurai's centuries-long role as Japan's military elite and cleared the path for the Meiji state's unimpeded modernization. The suppression of the Satsuma Rebellion decisively validated the Meiji government's military reforms and cemented its authority nationwide. The Imperial Army's triumph over Japan's most formidable traditional fighting force proved that modern organization, logistics, and technology had rendered samurai warfare obsolete. More importantly, the rebellion's failure eliminated the last major domestic obstacle to the government's modernization agenda, allowing leaders to shift focus from internal pacification to international diplomacy and economic development. Yet the Satsuma Rebellion did not signal the disappearance of the samurai. It heralded their most profound transformation. Stripped of hereditary privileges and martial function, former warriors faced the urgent task of redefining their place in a rapidly industrializing society. Rather than fading into obscurity, many ex-samurai demonstrated remarkable adaptability, leveraging their education, administrative experience, and leadership skills to become key architects of Japan's modern state. This integration unfolded through multiple avenues. The Imperial Army, despite its universal conscription model, urgently needed experienced officers to guide its transition to Western military methods. Former samurai filled these roles, their ingrained discipline, loyalty, and martial ethos proving invaluable in forging a professional military. The army's rapid expansion in the 1880s and 1890s created abundant opportunities, especially for those willing to master modern tactics while preserving core warrior values. Government service offered another major pathway. The Meiji administration, building modern institutions from scratch, required literate, administratively skilled personnel precisely the profile of Tokugawa-era samurai bureaucrats. Their expertise in record-keeping, legal procedure, and personnel management made them indispensable in establishing ministries, courts, and prefectural offices across the country. Education became a particularly fertile field. The government's push for universal schooling created demand for teachers and administrators who could blend Western pedagogy with Japanese moral values. Many ex-samurai became school principals and instructors, instilling ideals of character development and civic duty in the first generation of modern Japanese citizens, thus shaping national culture from the classroom. Even commerce, once scorned under Confucian hierarchy, gradually attracted former warriors. Recognizing the economic potential of industrialization, many ex-samurai launched manufacturing ventures or entered trade, aided by government subsidies and protective policies. Their transition into business reflected a pragmatic redefinition of service to the nation. Perhaps the most consequential adaptation was the ideological repurposing of bushido. No longer a practical warrior code, it was reconstructed as a nationalistic ethos to unify the populace and legitimize modernization. Government officials and intellectuals selectively drew from samurai traditions to craft an idealized moral framework, emphasizing loyalty to the emperor, self-sacrifice, and duty, while downplaying the historical realities of regional rivalry, political ambition, and pragmatic compromise that had characterized actual samurai life. This sanitized bushido was disseminated through schools, military training, and propaganda. The 1890 imperial rescript on education enshrined samurai-derived virtues loyalty, filial piety, self-discipline as civic duties for all Japanese, regardless of class. Military conscription became a primary vehicle for indoctrination, framing service as the modern citizen's inheritance of the samurai spirit. Over time, this democratized warrior ethic permeated civilian life, fostering social cohesion and obedience to authority. The ideology intensified during Japan's imperial wars. Victories in the Sino-Japanese, 1894, 1895, and Russo-Japanese, 1904-1905, conflicts were attributed to the superiority of Japanese spirit rooted in bushido. By the 1930s and 1940s, however, this ethos became dangerously distorted, promoting blind obedience, glorification of death and fanatical resistance. It provided ideological fuel for kamikaze attacks and civilian martyrdom, culminating in catastrophic defeat. In the post-war era, Bushido's association with militarism led Allied occupation authorities to condemn it as incompatible with democracy. The 1947 Constitution explicitly renounced war, severing the state's ties to warrior ideology. Yet Japanese intellectuals undertook a careful re-examination, distinguishing authentic samurai heritage from wartime propaganda. Academic historians, using primary sources, revealed the complexity and diversity of historical warrior culture, challenging both romantic myths and blanket condemnations. Popular culture played a crucial role in reimagining the samurai. Writers like Yukio Mishima explored themes of honor and aesthetic discipline in ways that resonated with post-war existential concerns. But it was cinema, especially the films of Akira Kurosawa, that reshaped global perceptions. Seven Samurai and Yojimbo portrayed warriors not as nationalist icons, but as morally complex individuals navigating ambiguity, emphasizing personal integrity over blind loyalty. These films introduced worldwide audiences to samurai values, mastery, mortality, honor in ways that transcended historical accuracy, yet captured their philosophical essence. Today, the samurai legacy endures in unexpected forms. Japanese corporate culture, with its emphasis on lifetime employment, group harmony, and consensus building, nemawashi, echoes the mutual obligations of lord and retainer. The pursuit of perfection in craftsmanship and continuous improvement, kaizen, reflects the samurai's disciplined pursuit of mastery. Yet these traditions also pose challenges. Rigid hierarchies can stifle innovation, and excessive loyalty may hinder adaptability. Lessons many firms have had to confront since Japan's economic stagnation began in the 1990s. Globally, Japanese martial arts kendo, judo, aikido, karate have evolved from combat systems into paths of personal development, attracting millions who seek discipline, respect, and self-improvement. Though far removed from battlefield utility, they preserve philosophical and technical lineages that connect practitioners to centuries of warrior tradition, now adapted for peace. Ongoing scholarly research through archaeology, document analysis, and cross-cultural comparison continues to refine our understanding of samurai society, revealing its contradictions, diversity, and humanity beneath layers of myth. The challenge remains to honor the genuine achievements of warrior culture while rejecting the ideological distortions that led to tragedy. In contemporary Japan, public discourse on national identity, constitutional reform, and international role often invokes samurai imagery, but increasingly in service of peaceful virtues, resilience, ethical leadership, cultural pride without aggression. The samurai's journey from regional warriors to bureaucrats, from nationalist symbols to global icons of discipline and honor, stands as one of history's most remarkable examples of cultural reinvention. Their legacy endures not as a rigid doctrine, but as a living conversation about the balance between tradition and progress, individual excellence and social responsibility. As long as humanity values courage, integrity, and the pursuit of mastery, the story of the samurai will continue to inspire and caution future generations.